So I thought I'd try something different today. Usually I come prepared when I vlog, like I have some kind of clear, concise outline of the things I'm going to say, but this time I wanted to just kind of talk about like what are otome games and what it's like to translate them. So this is probably going to wind up being like a really long, rambly video. So if you're one of those people that likes like your nice little tidy 2 to 3 minute clips, bye. And if you're a kind of person who is bored, wants to kill half an hour, wants to fall asleep to something, or wants something to watch or listen to while eating lunch, then stay tuned. So if you just randomly stumbled across this video, just a quick background, I translate otome games for a living professionally, as in like I'm paid money to translate otome games. And I have been doing so for almost like exactly 3 years now. I think by the time this vlog goes up on the internet, it will be like exactly 3 years since I started translating otome games. So when I tell people about this like in person, a lot of them have no idea what otome games are. So I figured I'd start by explaining what otome games are. So the easiest way to describe them is they're basically like choose your own adventure books. If you don't know what those are, you were obviously born after I was. Choose your own adventure books are basically like a regular book. You're reading it, and then at one point in the story you come to a point where it'll be like what choice do you make? Do you give the guy the bucket of water, or do you douse the guy with the bucket of water? And if it's like, if you give him the bucket of water, turn to page 5. If you douse him with the bucket of water, turn to page 55. And then like the story diverges, and then depending on the choices you make, like you shape the direction of the story, and then like you get a bunch of different endings. So otome games are similar in that they are like stories that you read. They're like, I'm not going to say they're like high fiction or like really well written stories necessarily. They're kind of like they're like Twilight. They're like, fan fiction or like, romance stories. Like most of them are romantic. Actually, I think pretty much all of them are romantic. I have not encountered one that is not romantic. But it's a story. It's prose, you're reading a story, and then at some point it says, like, make a choice, or please select, like, do you do this thing or do you do this thing? And then, based off of the choices, the story changes a little bit. So here's where otome games diverge from choose your own adventure books. Most otome games, this is not true of all of them, but most of them, like, choice A and choice B, regardless of which choice you choose, the story doesn't really change. Like, the next few lines after the choice might change a little bit, but then the story always just goes back to the main story. So it's kind of like, what's the point and why am I even making these choices? I'm not influencing the story at all. But what they do is each choice is worth a certain number of points. Usually it's 2 choices, sometimes it's 3. And whatever they consider to be the best choice, which is not always the best choice, whatever they choose to be the best choice will give you like 10 points, and then the worst choice might give you 5 points or 0 points or something. And then depending on how many points you have by the time you get to like almost the ending of the story, they'll give you like different endings. So like if you answered really poorly on the questions and you have really low points, you have to read the not as good ending, which again sometimes is actually the better ending. But if you get like a lot of points, then you get to read like the really good ending. But I mean, regardless, both endings are usually happy endings, so it's kind of like there's no like risk, there's like no stakes involved in like what choices you choose. And then also in most otome games, like you can pay money, either real or fake, to get more points. We'll get to that later. So that's mostly where I come in, is I translate the stories. I do not like draw the characters, I do not draw the backgrounds, I do not draw all the little freebies and goodies. I don't program anything either, I just translate it. Now, having said that I do not program, that's like kind of true, kind of not true. The files that I translate from are usually Excel documents, and the programming of the game is like intact. So it'll be like gobbledygook, gobbledygook, things, and then Japanese words, and then gobbledygook, gobbledygook in the cell, and I have to replace like just the Japanese with English and then leave the gobbledygook intact. And then the main character, which you are, you get to input your name, kind of like an Oregon Trail, except that typically players, I don't think, call their avatars my butt. But since you're allowed to input your own name for your main character, I have to put like a programming tag for whenever they're using the main character's name, which gets pretty funny because like if I'm translating a love scene and it's like, I love you name, or I love you first name, like with a bunch of programming tags, it's just kind of funny. It's like the guys just call her name or first name. It's really romantic. But yeah, I basically just translate the Japanese story stuff into English. And then I also translate a lot of like the tutorial stuff into English. I translate a lot of like the little random messages that pop up when you log on to the game and stuff like that. Okay, so that's like, you know, step one of what Otome Games are. It's like a choose your own adventure story, but kind of not really. And so you might be watching this if you've never played an Otome game, you're just like, well, what's the point? Like, how is it even a game? It's just kind of a story. So the thing that makes it more like a game, and this will vary from series to series, is that you will have, like as you're playing the game, sometimes it'll stop all of a sudden and be like, oh, now you have to like pass this test to move on in the story. And usually this test is just like collect a certain number of like love points or affection points, sometimes they're called, before you can move on in the story. And the way that you collect these points is either by spending real money to get fake money to buy points, or by basically like depending on how often you play the game, how many times you log in. Sometimes there's little like little battles, little games that you do that may or may not involve any skill. It's oftentimes just you tap a button, you win. And if you pass those or win those, you get points. And then if you get a certain number of points, you can keep reading the story, yay! So that's one way that there's sort of like a game. And then there are other things like, I'm kind of jumping ahead. This is why it's a rambling video. Ha. Hi all 5 of you that are still there. So the next thing that I have to mention in Otome Games for them to make a little more sense to people is there's what's called the main story, and then there are like events or campaigns or other things. So main story is what you get when you first buy or download, if it's a free app, the game. Oh, that's one thing that I probably should have mentioned at the start. The Otome Games I translate are for smartphones. They are apps. And I think almost every game that I personally have translated is a free app. So you can go like right now and like look for free app Otome Games, download it and play one if you're interested. Like they're free. Like you don't have to pay for anything. But anyway. So the main story, which is just, you know, the main stories of the guys that you're dating. And then there's events, which are, or campaigns, or like limited edition stories. And these, like, they'll only be available for like maybe 1 week or 2 weeks. And you want to finish the stories on time. But you can't do that unless like you have a certain number of points. So there is some strategy involved where like, they'll give you like, oh, for this time period only, like you get triple the points when you play this game or whatever. And like you can win certain items that you can trade in for points or trade in to read extra parts of the story, and then like how you use those can be strategic. So like that is kind of what makes it like a game, like more strategic and less like you're just reading a romance novel. Okay, so main story events. Now, another thing that I probably should have opened this video with, because it's kind of significant about Otome Games, is it's not just a love story with like one guy. There's usually several different guys you can choose from. I'd say like there has to be at least 3 guys. I have never really encountered an Otome game with fewer than 3 guys that you can date, unless it's like brand new and they're like just starting to release the guys, in which case there might be like 2. But you start out, yeah, you have like a list of usually 6 guys or so. And you have what's called the prologue story, which is sort of like it sets up the story and it helps you briefly meet all of the guys and see like which one you might want to choose. And then you basically choose one of the guys. You can't like do several stories at once usually. unless you have like several different phones, maybe, I don't know. And you choose one of the guys and you date him. Like you go through that story where you're dating him. And then all of the other guys that you're not dating will usually make cameo appearances or be an integral part of the story while you're dating that one guy that you're dating. But after you finish dating that guy and finish reading his story, you can go date another one of the guys, go through his story. And then in these events and reforms and short stories and like whatever they're called in various different games, like I said, it'll be like a limited time only thing where it's like a week or 2 weeks or a few days, and the stories are shorter in that case. And like the object of it is to get through every single guy's story arc, not just like one. Now another thing that makes it sort of like a game, and that gives you kind of incentive to win and go through, and this really is like the one element that when I played Otome Games to see what they were like, the one element that like actually captivated me a little bit was gacha. Now gacha it's this special, it's like basically like special things that you win for your avatar. And I like to think of your avatar as sort of just a doll. It's basically like, you know, a humanoid being. And you win certain things to make your doll pretty, like different hair or different eyes or different dresses or shoes. But then you can also win things sometimes, like the dolls also live in houses or rooms or schools or something. And then you can buy like different furniture items or different like backdrops where this character is living. So that's kind of neat. And if you pass certain stories, if you finish reading certain character stories on time during these like limited time only things, like you win those gacha. Now that you're even more confused about what Otome Games are than you were when you started watching this video, as far as my translating side of it goes, I did briefly touch upon it a little bit earlier in the video. Mostly what I have been translating is the events, not the main character stories. Oh, and the main character stories, by the way, those are available like forever, pretty much. Like you can go back and like go through those all over again and read them. But the events only last like a very short period of time, like the limited time things. And those are mostly what I translate. And generally I'd say, at least for one of the games that I'm translating material from basically last year in Japan. But it's skewed a little bit. Like I just recently finished translating a Halloween event for one of the games that I work on, and it's like August right now as I'm recording this. So, you know, Halloween event is obviously not going to be released until probably sometime in October, yet I'm translating it like months in advance so they can, you know, edit it and finish the programming and everything in time. But one thing that I really like actually about translating Otome Games instead of anime and other things that I've translated in the creative category is that with Otome Games, because a lot of what I translate is like, it's gone, it ceases to exist after it's been released, I can totally get away with throwing in like super current slang. Like usually they will frown upon that, but one of the companies I translate for, they really like things a little more localized, and they like things like adjusted and even mistranslated if it will read better, sound better, work better with the characters. So I have a lot of freedom in that regard to throw in like super current slang, which is nice. Because sometimes, like, I don't know, it's really weird, but I've noticed that a lot of the recent slang and terms and things that are coming out and being big, especially on social media, are perfect translations for certain Japanese words and idioms and phrases that like years and years ago had no good translation, but now like they have perfect translations. Like one thing that was coming to mind recently that actually hasn't come up in any of my translations, but that I was like, it hit me one day like, oh my god, we have a word for this now. I'm so excited. There's this word, urawaza, in Japanese, and I knew this word because like 15 years ago when I was living in Japan, I watched a show called Itoge no Shokutaku, which was basically like a family. I don't even know if they were a real family. They probably weren't. They were all celebrities. They'd sit around the table and they would watch videos made by viewers of like special secret tricks of how to do things, how to do tasks. And the special secret trick was urawaza. which literally means sort of like beneath the surface trick, kind of. It's like a really literal, weird translation of that. And I kept trying to tell people in America, like, oh yeah, I really like this Japanese show. And they're like, oh, what's it called? And I'm like, Hitoki no Shokutaku. And they're like, they do urawaza. And they're like, what's urawaza? I'm like, I don't know. But now we have a word, and it's hack. Life hack. That was like a super, super, super long preamble for me to go, yay. And maybe people used the term life hack before, but I have not seen it like used until the last, few years. So it was just this really happy discovery, like, oh my god, we have that word now. But there's a lot like that. Like, that's the only one that comes to mind right now. But it's just really nice. Like, that's what I like about translating Otome Games, in that most of the material is pretty current and disappears, so I have more freedom. So speaking, like, since I already was talking a little bit about style, I'll go ahead and talk a little bit more about style. So yeah, the translating style that I use for Otome Games, and that I am encouraged to use, because I have to answer to the companies for whom I translate. I can't just translate it the way I want to. Like, they'll tell me, like, how they want it. And they continue to give me notes even as I go, like, oh yeah, make this character softer, make this character, whatever. So... I talk English good. Right, so I'm encouraged in Otome Games to do translations that are a little more localized than I have been for when I've translated anime. And I guess it's because they're trying to appeal to a bit of a wider audience. Like, they know that a lot of the people who play Otome Games are nerds, and like people who like anime. But I think they still want to appeal to an audience that's not necessarily that familiar with Japanese terms and things. So I'm encouraged to localize more heavily. And for those of you who don't know what that term means, I personally didn't even know what it meant, like, until 3.5 years ago, and I'm a translator. But it's basically, instead of like just translating a sentence, like the literal meaning of it, it means really, transforming it so that it works like in the new language, so that it sounds more like it was written originally in English versus like, this used to be in Japanese, didn't it? It's kind of hard to explain and kind of hard to describe. It's something that just as a native speaker, you'll just kind of pick up upon it. Like, if a translation is heavily localized, it'll tend to have more slang, it'll tend to have more heart, like it'll tend to just be more vibrant and more colorful. But if it's like not so localized, it'll be a little more monotone, a little more like computery. You can tell how I feel about localized translations. I love them. I wish that more translations were more localized, frankly, but that's another video. So that's actually another thing that I really like about translating Otome Games, is that I generally like the style that my clients want me to translate it in. So what do I not like about translating Otome Games? I do not like, a lot of the times, the content, frankly. It's just like, I'm so over romance stories. I'm 35 years old, and I'm just not, occasionally, like, there'll be some good stories, and occasionally, even the romances in some of the games I've translated have actually been pretty cool, but generally they're not. They're just like really fluffy, and it's like, I'm not like hating on them exactly. Like, if people like them, that's cool, but it's just not really my thing. So if I have to like sit there translating, like, he touched my cheek, I blushed, I'm just like, oh my god, how many times do I have to translate I blushed, or I'm so embarrassed, or it's like, I swear, like, all of these heroines, like, they're just so hyper embarrassed about everything, and like, I understand, like, it's designed, at least for the Japanese side of things, it's designed for a younger audience, it's designed for people who have little to no romantic experience, and who would be, like, really nervous and blush and be embarrassed just if a guy, like, held her hand or something. And it's like, I remember when I was like that too, when I was like, 16, but, yeah, I don't know, it's just, I'm like, really? As I'm reading these, like, really? The other thing I don't like about Otome Games is occasionally I find some of the material to be just a little sexist. Just a little. But the cool thing there is, again, the people for whom I translate, they encourage the translators to change things up just a little tiny bit, like without completely altering the translation, without completely altering the meaning of what the characters are saying. We are encouraged to alter things just a little bit so that they translate better into the culture. So I have, from time to time, like taken a line that was like, oh my god, if I translated that as is, that would just be so sexist. That he'd be such a douchebag saying that. And so I'll change it a little bit so he's like a similar sentiment, but not so douchey. But yeah, I'm just like, sometimes when I'm translating them. So that's not that great. So another thing I like about translating Otome Games is it's like this cheesy trope of like, it's actually right along the lines of how boy bands work. You have like these set archetypes for each different guy. You have like the brooding, arrogant guy, you have the quiet guy, you have baby face, you have sort of like the asshole with a heart of gold, and you have like the super good, like smart, has a great job, is a totally like normal stable guy. You have the he's much older than you guy. Sometimes you have the he's much younger than you guy. There are all these like different archetypes, but it's fun, I find, translating, when I'm translating a particular character's story arc, like if you're dating Bob, let's just call him Bob, I don't particularly like Bob in his own story arc, but I do like all the other guys, all the other love interests that are not currently love interests, because that's when their personalities really come out, and it's a lot of fun, like, differentiating between their personalities and translating them in different ways. So I like that aspect of Otome Games. So yeah, I rambled a lot about Otome Games, and for all 2 of you that are still watching this video, if you have any questions about what I just said, if you want further clarification or for me to expand more upon something, go ahead and leave questions in the comments. And sometime later I plan on doing a similar rambling video about translating anime, because I also do that. I have not been doing that so much recently. Like, it's been 5 months now since I've translated any anime, because I've been like so busy doing Otome Games. But I like to do another video rambling about translating anime, so if you have any questions pertaining to anime translating, leave those in the comments as well. And for the 1 person who's still watching this video, go ahead and like the video if you liked it. I mean, I hope you liked it if you're still watching it, because otherwise, wow. I don't really know what else to say. Bye!